I'd like to start by thanking Cora and Women at Accenture for inviting me to be here today. You know, it's International Women's Day week, month, however you want to call it. It's a very busy time. And it's incredible because for the first time, there's never been this much discussion on gender equality anywhere. But interestingly enough, it's still sometimes hard to think about where we have and haven't made progress when it comes to gender roles, especially when you have someone like Donald Trump in office in the US, but that's another conversation for another time. I did want to start with something fun though. So there's a book I really like that came out 2 years ago. It's by a talented graphic designer named Yang Liu. And what she does is she simplifies everyday gender stereotypes. And she does this, graphically. And it's interesting to see which stereotypes you think still exist today, how relevant they are today. So I thought we might just take a quick look. Okay, so the first one, you've got the same image. And on the one hand, you have a modern man. And then you have the housewife. I always find this funny. So you've got the male self-image, which is very, very healthy, let's just say. And then you've got the female self-image, which is not as confident, we'll just say. I thought this was interesting too. So this is basically the ideal standard, the dream woman for the man at ages 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. Let's just say it's consistent. And then you've got the projected dream man for the woman who, tends to evolve over time. Just says a little something. Then here you've got man to man, which is really just straightforward and direct and linear, and woman to woman, and she depicts it as a little all over the place. Okay, and the last one I have is single focus versus multitasking, which is always, part of the conversation when it comes to gender roles. But let's just say, regardless of whether you think these gender stereotypes still exist, I know you're Ascension, you like data and numbers, and the numbers don't lie. When it comes to women in the workplace, there certainly still is a gender gap. So especially at senior leader roles, and especially in Asia. So what I'm going to spend the rest of the time doing is telling you a little bit more about my story and how I've come to really believe that now more than ever, Asia needs more women leaders. Okay, so it's a personal story. This is my mother on her wedding day. And she always tells me that her dream was to be a housewife when she was growing up. She grew up in 1950s Philippines. So she spent all her time flipping through Reader's Digest and gazing at photos from Time Life magazine. These were images of the American dream, father coming back from work and mother caring for the home. But this actually really wasn't her reality, because she and my father were hardworking new immigrants in the US and Canada. At any given time, both my parents had 2, if not 3 jobs. For my mother, this was everything from teaching preschool to working in a dress shop to managing our Filipino food booth at the local summer fair. So being a housewife was never an option. Instead, she got a second degree while she was in Canada as an early childhood teacher. And soon after this got her a job at the United Nations International School, where my brother and I were able to attend tuition free in New York. She was also passionate about art, so she pursued a second career in printmaking. And this really ended up taking off after my brother and I kind of finished school. So my mother didn't do it intentionally at all, but she's a big reason I've come to believe that families can thrive when you've got your women in these kind of career roles. So for the first time in history, a dual income for many families is no longer a choice, but a need. I've lived in North America, in New York, Hong Kong, Singapore, and everywhere I go, I hear the same thing. Today's high cost of education, housing, living expenses make it very difficult for the average family to get by without a dual income. And when I say average family, I mean everyone from your hardworking, working class families to your more privileged ones. Because I know how lucky I am. My parents were new immigrants. They worked hard and managed to send me and my brother to private school. I went to college at Yale and landed great jobs at big firms. I met my husband, Alex, while we were both working in Brazil, and we've continued to live and work abroad ever since. Now, all this is to say is that I know firsthand when it comes to even top earners in today's society, it's getting really hard to do it on one income. For this reason, the percentage of dual income families has more than doubled in the last 30 years. And this is happening around the world. The number of women is increasing across most regions, but surprisingly, as Cora mentioned, Asia is projected to have the lowest representation of women in executive roles in 2025. And working at the Women's Foundation, I thought, okay, I have access to all this research. Why would this be? Because Asia's got so many highly educated women who for some reason are not advancing in the workplace. So the numbers, as I said, don't lie. And this has led me to ask, why is this? Why are Asian women not progressing in their careers? Wouldn't all the high-achieving girls in school have high-achieving career ambitions? How can we have so many tiger moms and so few tiger women? So I concluded that it comes down to this. Asian girls are socialized to reach their highest potential at school, but Asian women are not socialized to reach their highest potential at work. And there are many factors that play into this, from cultural mindsets that are deep-rooted to sometimes government missteps, like using the term leftover women, still calling single women spinsters, as indicated on Hong Kong immigration forms. That one, it took me quite a while to get over. But I definitely am passionate about this subject. I realize this. I'm a working mother. I've always cared about my career. I now have 2 daughters, Isabella and Sophia, as well as one son, Carlos. So I have skin in the game, we'll just say. But I really believe everyone should, because this isn't just a women's issue, right? It's not just about Asian women's advancement. It's about Asia's economic advancement. It's not just about gender. It's about generations. And it's not just about work, it's about family. So I think everyone in this room and beyond should care. So speaking of Asian students, as I was growing up, like many Asian girls, I was a great student. I got straight A's, I sat up front in the class, I took good notes. But I'll always remember that bittersweet feeling I had when I first became conscious of the Asian female stereotype. So I was taking books out of my locker when I overheard someone called Todd Monahan trying to convince some of his friends to cut class. He said, "Don't worry, just copy a girl's notes." And, oh, better yet, copy an Asian girl's notes. So despite my resentment, I knew this was still good advice, because Asian girls are expected to be at the top of their class, and more often than not, they are. But something happens, and this is what I've been finding. So something happens between school and the workplace when Asian females stop reaching the top. When it comes to women leaders at the top, we're way behind the US and Europe. So women represent 15% of company board members in the US, 17% in Europe, and we'll play the guessing game in Asia. Anyone?
12.
6. So 6% in Asia. And that's across the board. So it is true, China is well ahead, but certainly on average. And that is just so shocking, especially with all of the educated women in Asia that we have. So I found when I moved to Singapore with my husband, we had our 9-month-old son, Carlos. And one of the things that I noticed right away was that it was pretty common for people to ask me if I had plans to stop working. And once I had Isabel, my second, this question came up increasingly more. And then when I had my third, Sophia, everyone just thought it wasn't a matter of if, but when. And people were nice about it, just kind of gently reminding me that, I should start thinking about what's in the best interest of my family. I didn't take any of it personally because I fully appreciate the focus on family. And part of the reason I've always felt a strong connection to Asia is because family's front and center here. So I love the big weekly family gatherings, the respect for elders, and the fact that no one's fazed when I say my parents or my in-laws are staying for weeks or months at a time. That's just how it is. I also wrote, as Cora mentioned, 2 family memoirs. So don't forget the soap, and then in brackets is and other reminders from my fabulous Filipino mother. And the second one's don't forget the parsley, and more from my positively Filipino family. So we'll just say if there are 2 things I'm most proud of, it's my family and my Filipino roots. So one of the things that many people don't realize about the Philippines is for the last several years now, it's been ranked as one of the top 10 gender equal nations in the world by the World Economic Forum. And so correspondingly, it's the #1 gender equal nation in Asia. And it's an anomaly in the region, but women are represented in leadership roles across all sectors of society. And anyone who's been to the Philippines knows that it's a very family-friendly, family-oriented society. So most of these women leaders are balancing all-consuming family lives as well. And I'm not saying the Philippines doesn't have a host of other issues to work through. But when it comes to women in the workplace, they're definitely doing something right. I think part of it is there's no social bias whatsoever on working women. No guilt placed on mothers going off to work and maybe because it's such a developing country, but they fully understand that women's career advancement is what's in the best interest of the family. And this is the case now more than ever, right? So as I said, it's a point in time where many families need 2 incomes to survive. And part of that means that we need to start socializing women to reach their highest potential in the workplace. Because if we don't do this, we're doing a disservice to our families today. It's in every family's best interest for women to be paid equally to men and for women to have just as much opportunity as men. I often think about what this means for my kids. And it does make me a little angry when I think that Isabel and Sophia might make only 78% of what Carlos makes simply because they're female. But at the same time, I get a little nervous and even protective thinking about my son Carlos as a young man and the pressure he might feel if he's the sole provider for his family, to be quite honest. So for me, we need to educate more families about the value of encouraging girls, not just to do well in school, but to contribute to economic development and take on leadership roles. Families need to know about the rewards and not just the challenges of 2-career households. So recent research shows that daughters of working females do better and in general secure higher positions than children of mothers who don't work outside the home. And sons of working females demonstrate more gender-neutral behavior. And this is part of why Alex always likes for Carlos to see his mom in action. He comes to a lot of our events. He wants Carlos to see his mom, as a tiger mom and a tiger woman, he says. So whether we like it or not, the world's changing around us, and we're at a point when we have to start socializing girls to reach their highest potential at school and at work. Because not only will our families be in a stronger position, our economy will be in a stronger position. For the Asian economy to continue to grow and thrive, we can't leave behind half our population. So I'm sure all of you know this, but half of Asia's graduates are female. So just imagine the huge waste of talent if more women continue dropping out of the workforce. And think of all the innovation and solutions that would come out of Asia if more women continue to reach their highest potential. So I've spent some time just talking about that personal side of the story, but it's why I've come to believe that we do need to get everyone on board. And once we do this, we'll unleash the potential of millions of Tiger women who, like my mother, will build a better world for themselves and for their families and for every single one of us. So thank you.
So thank you, Claire, for the overview of what does it mean, and why do we need Tiger women. Now we're going to start a live polling session where we need everyone's contribution to make this work. So Claire, while everyone is getting ready, from your experience being a Tiger woman and also various talk you have done, what are generally people's response to the term Tiger woman? Is it very positive, responding, yes, I want to be it? Or people, because Tiger mom has a slightly negative connotation to it. So what do you think?
Well, I think like many things, you get different reactions. So from working women, they certainly, in general, seem to embrace the term. So they say, oh, it's great to finally hear about Tiger women and not just Tiger moms. But I will be honest, I have also gotten feedback, and I live in a very community where many of the moms are not going to the office, and so there is kind of a question about, can you be a Tiger woman without, having a career, essentially. So there's sometimes, some of that debate as well, which always makes things interesting.
Right. So now let's start with our first question. This one is for our women in the... Yes, everyone started answering. When you walk into a meeting, do you grab a seat at the table? Let's say. All right, so the always is decreasing. Oh no. Yeah, so a lot of people choose sometimes. I choose my seat based on my role. Oh. I'm trying to control what I say, but the results keep changing. But we can see that it is the sometimes I choose my seat based on the role at the meeting that's leading right now. Okay, so I think we're almost done. I guess we can close this question in 10 more seconds. So from my own experience, this is something that I had to work hard and remind myself. And the tip that someone told me is, picture that you're not walking into a meeting, you're going for a dinner. Do you ever question, do you sit at the table or not when you go for a dinner? You never do that. So walk into the meeting room. If you're invited there, if you're part of the meeting, be at the table and be present. How about you, Claire? Was that something hard for you as well during your corporate life?
Yeah, I think there's always, of course, some discretion, but I think in general, the rule of thumb should be that if you're invited to the meeting, your presence is wanted and your input is invited. And so, yeah, correspondingly, you should be at the table.
And quickly in the room, anyone have comments or sharing or questions on this one before we go to the next? Doesn't look like it, then we'll proceed to the next one. So second question, this one is for the man in the room. Yes, so this is just out of curiosity. I don't think we need to ask women about this one, but man, are you concerned about how you dress? Do you worry about that? This is indeed interesting. We definitely see which answer is leading right now.
Getting a little more.
The other one's catching up. It's almost equal. Almost.
Okay.
This is an interesting...
Well, look at that.
That's 48. Yeah, this is actually very
It is.
interesting. It's good that we asked this question to actually validate with this audience how people feel about it. Because the myth is guys don't care, and only women care about that, and we all worry about how we're being judged. So it turns out it's actually not just a women thing, and I think ultimately it boils down to. Whoa, whoa, whoa! Okay, so now we're validating what we usually hear. It's that men usually hear
Right.
a capability. But this gives an interesting view, and what this question is meant to bring out is that awareness of women tend to worry a lot about how to dress, and it's good to know that there are some men who worry about that too. So now we can all be just think that this is not a gender thing. It's just something that we all worry about, our work reputation, because we care about our careers. And in every morning, we just need to focus on like being polished and
But-
not have to worry about.
Yeah, I mean, I do think in terms of, and it's part of what we're trying to address in my real career line as well, but there certainly still can be more of a focus on what a woman is wearing. And just ask Hillary Clinton, who goes through that with her hair and her suit and her this and her that, versus whoever she's campaigning against. But yeah, there's certainly a dynamic there.
Okay, and from the webcast, we received one question. So we encourage girls go tech, but what if our clients do not accept them into their projects as men are perceived to be more logical and rational? Okay, let me first give the more Accenture point of view, and then Claire can give an external view as well. If our client do not accept them, I think it is for all of us on that same project to help address that. We need to understand where the client is coming from. Is it cultural, or is it something else, or is it really gender? We need to really get to the root cause of the problem. But it is the project team, the whole team's responsibility to help our women colleagues on the project team to be accepted by the client and to be perceived as a team being logical, rational, professional, and capable to deliver the project. And Claire, have you come across anything like that in your work life?
Well, I think at the Women's Foundation as well, but there are definitely preconceived notions about what boys and girls go into, which we're trying to address. And so much, like everything else, is exposure. And so I think, and data is so important because you can show, there's no kind of inherent piece to men being more analytical or logical, but just how we are trying to get an equal footing to be able to make that progress. And I think, hopefully, the clients will come to appreciate that.
Yep. Okay. So now let's move on. Oh, sorry, there's a question from the audience. Yes.
Thank you. I'm just curious to understand if that situation did present itself, if from an Accenture point of view, we would consider whether or not to continue doing business with a client that would have such a discriminatory attitude towards our very capable staff.
Well, I think this one, it's a problem to be addressed, and ultimately we need to look at the project situation and all that. But it boils down to whether we can solve the problem or not and how we get around it. And also, usually, it's not the whole client account that it's impacted. If it boils down to one individual, we need to work around that individual then to protect our team than we do. So there are different ways of getting around it, and we can actually have a deeper conversation about this later on with our Accenture MDs as well. But key it's everyone on the project team's responsibility to help whoever feels discriminated at a client site. Anything else? Okay, shall we move on to the third question then? This one is for everyone in the audience. So this one is a harder one that reflects more reflections. Are you comfortable saying no when you don't have capacity to handle more? Yeah, so let's see. So now I'll just say no, I can't do it, it's leading. But there's also a popular choice of I'll just work harder to cover this task too. Now we're getting the different answers now. So let's see. I'm going to give it some time to settle. Because this one is one of the harder questions, but it actually happens a lot in our daily work lives. Okay, so I think it's more or less stabilized now. And most, so 47, 48%, if the task doesn't align with my priority, I'm comfortable saying no and providing the justification. So which is a great one. Actually, at Women at Accenture, in one of our local events, we did talk about having that North Star that guides your career and make sure everything you do aligns with your priority and helps you grow. And because there's only 24 hours per day, and you need to be very strict about your priorities. The interesting one I wanted to highlight is we also always hear that females tend to want to be helpful and want to be the nice girl, and we'll just work harder and cover that task. And I think the advice is just try not to do that. Always remember, always assess, just like more than half of the room here, assess if that aligns with your priority. So now, Claire, did you have any incidents like that when you have that person comes like, Claire, please help me out. I have this one last task that I just really need help.
I like the role play. I do think, I think there's something to be said about that. And actually, Cora and I were in a lunch meeting yesterday with a president of one of the Cambridge colleges, an all-female college, and she was talking about how many times women in the workplace are kind of given some of the tasks that are, they need to get done, but they're not necessarily your high profile projects. But they give it to, they can give it to a woman saying, I know you'll get it done, right? And that resonated with a lot of people in the room. And that resonated with, myself too, and kind of earlier in the career. And I think that is one of those things, if you ever have to do those letters about what I would write, the letter I would write my younger self, that was a big piece that I learned, kind of prioritizing and how to say no.
Definitely. Yes, we have another question from the audience.
Hi, I think it's a great question, but I think that the answer would vary with some context. So, for example, if you have a team which is exceptionally dominated by men with very few women, and everyone on that team is working, let's say, undesirable hours to reach an outcome, I think that there is more of a concern to say no because you see your male counterparts working at that pace and those hours. So while you might in a situation, if it's just you, be more likely to say no, in that context, I think there'd be the fear of a perception that the gender, even on a subconscious level, would play a role when none of the men are making an issue of it.
Yeah, I tend to agree because it really depends on the context. I know how it feels to be the only female in the room, and you watch what you say, what you do, and you're afraid that what you say, you don't say it because of your gender, but it gets perceived that way. And don't have much advice about that one. So thank you for your sharing. I think it's a good one. It boils down to as vague as use your judgment, unfortunately. I hate to give such a vague answer, but thank you for the sharing. Claire, anything to add on that one?
No, I think, it is certainly a scenario that can happen, but yeah, kind of using your discerning judgment at that point.
Right, which women tend to be better at because we're better at feeling what the other person is feeling and also being careful of what we say, what the consequences are about what we say. Okay. So if nothing else on this question, and one more. Oh, yay, we have a man over here with the question. Thank you.
And you're dressed really well, by the way.
Oh, you're so kind, thank you. Hong Kong is a very multicultural working environment. So gender is obviously one aspect of diversity, but there's also language, culture, and nationality. So I was wondering how you feel those other factors interplay with gender, because for me, for example, from London, it was much more monocultural, whereas here there's a lot of diversity beyond gender as well in terms of language, culture, etc.
Yeah, actually, we recently had our International Women's Day kind of gala lunch, and the keynote speaker, it's going to connect. The keynote speaker was this person, Gary Liu, who's the new CEO of SCMP, and he said something that really resonated to that, which was diversity by appearance means next to nothing. It's diversity of thought that's key. And I think diversity of thought, of course, it corresponds to the cultural aspects and everything else. And certainly, coming to a new environment like a Hong Kong or Singapore, where so multi kind of cultural, the diversity is really across the board, and it's important to have all of those dimensions, I think, too, to make the best decisions.
Yeah. I grew up Canadian, so the strength of Canada that we always say, it's built on the diversity. And I think in Hong Kong, I actually find Hong Kong quite multicultural too. I think it's also because of the Accenture environment that we have a lot of diverse people from different backgrounds. And I actually find that's part of the fun. And I don't really necessarily find it just the gender diversity it's here. It's all everything mixed together. Yeah. Anything else on this question? If not, let's move on to the next one. It's also for everyone. So now, when it comes to a new role, your supervisor approaches you or you see an interesting role, how do you assess your readiness? Do you look at the qualification, it's like a checklist? Yeah, based on where it will take you? Or does it look fun? Okay, so now where the role will take me, it's leading. And the other two as well. Now let's stabilize and see which one is the second one. Okay, so it does look like a lot of our audience is assessing it based on where the role will take me, which makes a lot of sense, and that resonates with having that North Star and having the priority in terms of choosing what you do and what you not do. The point of this question here is to talk about, you have probably heard of it before, is a woman will always look at the qualifications and make sure she meets 100% of the qualification before applying for a job. But in reality, it's that men tend to apply when they only have 60% of the qualification, which tells us a lot about the hiring process and applying new roles, and we actually don't need to wait for ourselves to be fully ready. And it's really good to see that in this audience, that the role itself matters more than like going through that checklist and making sure it meets 100% of the qualifications. So Claire, over to you. When you made the switch from financial services into an NGO and taking on a completely new role, how did you assess that role?
Well, certainly, I always assess it by where the role will take me, as well as what I can contribute. And kind of going into a business development role at the foundation was a great balance where I felt like I could use my skill set and banking business partnership background and apply it into something I was equally passionate about. So that's been great fun for me, actually. I was going to say something on this too, but on the one hand, it's the candidate and whether they apply thinking that they meet all the qualifications. But then the other piece, which we're starting to become more aware of too, it's also the interviewing panels and what they are using to make as the assessment. So again, we have some research kind of showing that the interview panel tends to look at, for men, their potential, like the potential they could bring to that role. And for women, it's more of their track record and what they've done. So it's one of those, all those unconscious bias trainings are so big now, but I think there's something to that and just the thought process behind it.
Yeah. And that's actually a very useful insight because many of us in the room also do recruiting for Accenture. And we need to be very aware of our unconscious bias in the process to make sure we select the best candidate and filter out all of our unconscious bias. So now let's move on to the next question. And also our final question, it's that the topic of self-promotion. Do you do any self-promotion of your own achievement to your supervisor or your career counselor? So let's see how many people summarizes it for the career counselor and make the career counselor's job easier. So far looking good. A lot of people summarize their achievement. But we also have some who are who think that the supervisor should be aware of my achievement. We have some who are uncomfortable discussing the achievement. Okay, and the what is self-promotion? So in this context, what I was referring to is self-promotion. It's claiming credit for what you have done. And this is just part of being fair to yourself. If you have done it and if it's fully factual, it's actually okay. And in Accenture context is when it comes to performance management time, do that summary for your career counselor, for your supervisor, to make sure that they remember everything that you have done and contributed. So now, outside of Accenture, Claire, do you see other companies or any trends like promoting people, encouraging people to do that self-promotion so that they get the credit they deserve?
Yeah, and I would say, quite honestly, since I've come to Asia, in Singapore and Hong Kong, but the self-promotion, it's something that, I think men need that training as much as women in Asia, because it is, I think there's some cultural elements where people are generally more humble about what they as an individual have done, which is admirable in many respects, but in the workplace can hold you back. So I think it's a good question. I'm glad we asked it to the whole audience because I think it's relevant to all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the questions were aimed at raising the awareness of these are topics that are very popular in the context of gender diversity and also helping women advance. But it's actually applicable to both. So that's what we decided to ask everyone in the room. And what we hope you take away from the live polling is the reflection on how do you do these items on in your daily lives. Go ahead.
It was an observation on that last point. I think before you can promote your accomplishments or achievements, you first have to acknowledge that there are accomplishments and achievements. And I think for a great many of us, we tend to undervalue our contributions and what we've done. There might be the perception, and it may or may not be, so I don't know how strong of a line it is against gender, but there's definitely the tendency for some of us to shed light on what we perceive as what we perceive to be an accomplishment, whereas others might think, well, I've taken a test and I didn't get 100%, I only got a 90. Or yes, I got an MBA, but I didn't graduate with distinction, or something like that. If we have our own perceptions of it never really being good enough, until we overcome that, we can't accept that we should let other people know about it as well.
Yes, thank you for that sharing. It's actually very important. So we all need to keep that in mind in our daily work.
I would just want to thank women at Accenture again and the whole management team for actually making this as a priority, broadcasting it so that it's accessible to everyone, internal, external. I wish more firms would do the same. I think there's so much that can be taken from these discussions and applied to all aspects of life. I guess just practically speaking, I always like to leave these kinds of conferences or sessions with ideas of what I might do differently. And a few things that have come up for me, also based on this discussion and some others that took place this week, but is that there are so many stakeholders in kind of this closing the gender, whether it's a gender pay gap or the gap in leadership roles. And it is, I am confident it's being addressed from different areas. Certainly, I think working at the Women's Foundation with wonderful people like Rita and Connie, give me hope and so much encouragement about what the foundation's doing, how they're also working with key influencers in Hong Kong government, but also to influence some of these kind of more family-friendly policies. But at the same time, I think corporations have a role to play also. And I'm seeing that done more and more. So even when it comes to looking at how people are interviewing, the actual training of managers too, there are some very concrete things that have come up quite a bit. So whether it's even having policies in place like paternity leave, but if no one at the head, as a business head, is taking it, then there still will remain the stigma. So there's all sorts of things. Okay, on the corporate side, I think as an individual, there's a number of things people can kind of proactively, do as well, which when it comes to owning their career, and whether it's reverse mentoring or, making a point just to say, like, once a week, I'm not having lunch at my desk, or, that sort of thing. But just like everything else, I think, going back to my talk, but girls in school do so many things, very strategic about how they reach the top of their class. And although that same kind of mindset can certainly be applied to the workplace. And, just so thank you for having me here today. It's been a real pleasure. Thanks.